Okay, so what were my background and skills that contributed to becoming an Archviz artist? I have some things listed here. So drafting and design, something I did a lot of as a young person and in my early professional life. Photography is a hobby that I've developed throughout my life, which I believe contributes to being a better Archviz artist. Drawing, obviously, that's kind of where it all started for me. Video editing is another thing you might not think about. Art and architectural history is not something you'd think about, but that's something that I've studied a lot of and have a bachelor's degree in. But I believe it also contributes to being a better Archviz artist because I understand design concepts and design elements, and I'm used to studying architecture and understanding how it works. And this, of course, comes into play every day when I'm working with architects to try and visualize their projects. Digital art is another hobby of mine that I've used to try and practice my creative skills. And again, that contributes to being a better Archviz artist in general. Computer programming, something I've picked up along the way to do automation tools and scripting inside of 3ds Max and things like that. But it also comes into play in a big way when you're working in virtual reality. And in general, I just love learning new software and skills. And that is an important part of being an Archviz artist because there's always new software and there's always new tools. And if you want to be pushing the limits of what you can do, you need to be excited about learning those kinds of things. So again, I kind of started drawing as a kid, and that evolved into drafting and design in high school, where I took home awards in many architecture competitions. And it was actually hand drafting back then. You can see some of my hand drafting here on the screen. And I started working as a draftsman and a residential designer, both by hand and with CAD, at about 16. And all these skills are very useful, like I was saying, when trying to visualize architecture. And I use them daily in my job. Just the ability to understand drafting, to read plans. When you are an Archviz artist, you get plans in various different forms. They can be sketches, they can be AutoCAD, they can be Revit, and having that background is very useful. I also love experimenting with other traditional mediums like oil paints seen here. And this is a great exercise for things like color theory and composition. And these skills are very important for creating nice illustrations that people will connect with. So any creative outlets that you're exploring are good because there's a huge creative element to doing Archviz, obviously. So I like to expand into other areas because that helps to inform my Archviz work. And speaking of that, photography is a great way to explore lighting and composition. I think that photography is very closely related to Archviz. When creating renderings, you essentially become a photographer inside of a virtual 3D model. And knowing the technical settings of a digital camera translates directly into 3D. So in 3D, you have virtual cameras. In the real world, you have a physical camera. The settings match exactly, and the effects that they have match exactly as well. So understanding how a camera works, the technical aspects of a camera, is very useful for improving your ability to make good illustrations in 3D. Practicing photography, and this is important, it actually teaches you to distinguish what makes a good photo and distinguish it from a mediocre one. So this helps you to make good illustrations, because making a good illustration is not just making it look photoreal. That's not what makes a good illustration. A good illustration is something that people connect with and tells the story of the project in a way that people enjoy. In my opinion, photography is the most closely related medium to Archviz. I'm always working on experimenting with digital painting as well. And the big thing that this does is expands my knowledge of Photoshop, which is a software that you use every day in Archviz. And it's also a good exercise for composition, color, and general creativity. And Photoshop is one of those software where you can easily use just one portion of it and never even know or understand what the rest of the software can do. And so expanding your horizons into different areas really opens up new tools for you, and then you can apply that to your Archviz work. So in general, if you enjoy creative endeavors involving technical knowledge, Archviz is probably a great fit for you. Developing your skills in those areas increases your skills at creating 3D imagery and visual communication. Archviz ties together all my skills and interests into one job. Okay, so that's really what I love about Archviz and why I switched from wanting to be an architect to becoming an Archviz professional, because I felt like it really brought together the creative aspect and the technical aspect, and I enjoy both of those things. And that's why I love Archviz. That's why it was really a great fit for me. So what is the process of creating professional architectural visualizations? Let's talk about the software, the technologies, and some of the methods. The technical aspects of 3D graphics include a mixture of creativity and technical skills that make Archviz really exciting, and it's a constant learning process. So every 3D project starts with modeling. That's the basis of everything. And it involves a variety of different techniques and software. There's lots of different modeling software out there. The foundation of all 3D work, it's the foundation of all 3D work, including renderings, animation, VR, even 3D prints. Lots of software can model many architectural masses and elements. 3ds Max is the industry standard for modeling for high-end imagery because it's capable of modeling organic, highly complex models. So if you look at the chair example here, this could be modeled in various different software in a very blocky and simple way, but it's harder to get all the subtleties to make the fabric look soft and get the micro bevels onto these things. And 3ds Max is a very powerful and capable software. And so it's kind of the industry standard as far as modeling for Archviz goes. 3ds Max modeling tools are widely used for modeling in video games, film, special effects, and Archviz. So the thing I tell people about software is that there's kind of a spectrum of, there's easy to learn software and then there's hard to learn software. And on the easy to learn side, you'll find the limitations of it a lot faster. On the hard to learn side, of software like 3ds Max, you may never find the limits of what you can create in there because it has so many tools, which makes it hard to learn, but also extremely capable. So you can do these really advanced models like the ones you see here. You can see, like on the right with this chair, all those wrinkles and softness in the chair. You get some very advanced modeling techniques going on there that 3ds Max handles very well. And again, here on the left, you see, again, trying to achieve that softness on things like furniture. And then on the right, you have a more basic model, which that's just using basic techniques that almost any modeling software could do that fairly easily. And here you see kind of the process a little bit. On the right, you see the simplified version with simple polygons. And then on the left, you see after we've applied smoothing and things like that, then we get something that looks very smooth, natural, organic. And this is how you start approaching photorealism, by getting models that have all those fine details in it. And once you have a nice model, then you need to apply materials. So materials add life and realism to your models. They are usually made up of images or procedural patterns mapped onto the surface of a model. So, for example, on the bottom right here, this kind of marble-y looking material, that is an image of marble that is mapped onto this object. And then different maps, oftentimes a black and white JPEG image, control different properties of a material. So every material has various different properties that make up the material. And like, for example, the color, the reflection, glossiness of that reflection, how much refraction it has. So you can see this one down here has actually some translucency to it. And that stuff can all be controlled with maps that we make in Photoshop typically. I use V-Ray for my materials, and V-Ray is a render engine that plugs into 3ds Max and has its own lights, materials, camera, and render settings. And it's not the only program that can do this. Mental Ray, Corona, and Arnold are all other render engines that have their own materials that can create photorealistic results. So there's a bunch of them out there. V-Ray is probably the most widespread as far as architectural renderings go. So here you can see the difference between a model and a model with nice materials applied. Here's a good example of materials. This is a rendering, just a close-up rendering of a camera, but you can see a lot of different materials going on here. You can see subtle things like the texture up here that's created with a black and white bump map that tells it where to be high and where to be low. And that actually doesn't have that surface in the model, but the material has that information in it to give it that look. And the same is going on here. You can see that on this metal, it has a brushed effect onto it, and that's created with a map as well, telling it how the reflection should spread out in different areas. So a tighter reflection here and then a softer reflection here makes it have that look of being brushed metal. So materials are an important part of any photorealistic rendering that you're trying to create. And then the materials have to be told how to map onto objects. And so here's our couch again that we saw the model of earlier. And what we do as an artist is lay out all the different polygons of this model flat and then paint color onto those flat polygons in Photoshop. And then also reflection maps and all the other maps we need to create a realistic looking material. Another element of any good 3D rendering would be lighting. And V-Ray is also used for that. We use area lights, which give shape to the light sources and add realism in the shadows. So you can see that V-Ray is doing a lot of work here as far as lighting the scene in a very natural and realistic way. And the area light thing is seen here, as in these shadows are very sharp as they're close to this big light source over here, but they get much, much softer as the shadows get farther away from this light source. And that's because the light is an actual size. It is not just a point in space. We use HDRIs, which is short for high dynamic range images. And those are images that can actually light your scene. And the advantage of that is that your background, which would be the image, and the lighting for your scene match exactly because the background is actually lighting your scene. So like this scene, for example, there is an HDRI image outside this window that's casting light through the window. We use realistic virtual cameras, and this is also done with V-Ray. They contribute heavily to the lighting of a scene through exposure settings. So you can't think of lighting divorced from the camera settings. The two together is what creates the exposure in your scene. And like I talked about earlier with photography, this is very akin to taking an actual picture in the real world. And you architectural photography. So exposure is very important, and that's done through camera settings. Lighting affects the color scheme of an image. Scene lighting is important for setting the mood and telling the story of an image. So just as an example, we can take the same scene. This one here is more of a sunset scene. Then take the same project, the same model, and apply different lighting to it. And you can see how it changes the look and feel of the image dramatically by just changing the lighting. Here's another lighting situation you see here where we're using a cool background and cool exterior versus a warm interior to kind of draw your eye to this area and help tell the story of the project. Okay, motion is an important part of Archviz as well, and it can be created with animation techniques, as in rendering 30 different frames for each second of video. So take a bunch of still shots, render 30 of them with slight motion going on between each one, and then you have video. It can also be created with virtual walkthroughs, like we saw an example of earlier. Virtual reality and GPU technology allow a valuable virtual walkthrough of a project, and this is more recent as technology has advanced. For rendering animation frames, V-Ray and 3ds Max are usually used, but it can also be done in real time with a game engine. For VR, a gaming engine such as Unity or Unreal Engine can be used. So I use Unreal Engine. It's good because of the pricing model for Archviz. They pretty much use it, or they allow you to use it completely for free to do Archviz projects. There's also interaction that can now be added to Archviz projects, and minimal programming knowledge is needed to make your game of your project do whatever you want. So it allows the user to explore options live and interactively, which is huge because a lot of times in today's world, clients want to see options. So you can either render different options, or you can have them stand in the space virtually and explore different options interactively. It's quite an effective tool for communicating. Game engines and real-time rendering with GPUs offer the most powerful and effective way of quickly communicating a space to people. So let's revisit some of these examples we looked at earlier with a video. Okay, so this is, again, a video game made in Unreal Engine 4 of a project. And it's very easy to go in there and just set up a camera and let it move through your space while recording. And it spits out cinematic video for you in real time. So if the camera movement is 5 seconds, then it only takes 5 seconds to render that animation, which is pretty slick when you compare it to how you would do it in 3ds Max and V-Ray, which would take much, much, much longer. So this is driven a lot by GPU technology. Everything is rendered as you look at it, like in a video game. So this is with the advancement of Unreal Engine 4 and with new GPU technologies that are getting better and better, this is becoming a more viable way to communicate our projects to people. And you can see the quality is pretty good. You can get much higher quality than this even. This is, what you're seeing now is the interaction part of it. So Unreal Engine 4 has its own coding language in it that uses block coding. So you need to understand the principles of computer programming, but not necessarily a specific language or syntax or anything like that. And they make it pretty easy to go in and just start doing simple little code snippets that can make your model interactive. So you can see here, you just set up a button to change the finish on the doors as an example. And this is that same project, but taken into VR goggles, which the quality of video in VR goggles is hard to match what a desktop can do because it has to render at about 90 frames per second. So it has to render very fast. But the awesome part is that you can actually stand inside of a space, and it's at human scale. It matches to all your motion, it matches to your height, and you can actually go in there and grab things and interactively make things happen. So again, huge advantage when trying to communicate to people if they can go and stand in the space and interact with it. So that's a good segue into the future of 3D graphics, because I think those kind of things are going to be a big part of the future. So the Archviz industry will continue to be a very dynamic and groundbreaking. It will continue to be very dynamic and groundbreaking. The demand for visualization on each project will continue to grow, but the software and techniques used will continually evolve. And that's one of the exciting things to me about it. Clients now rely on high quality imagery for their architectural projects. It's becoming standard for all projects. Static images will still be needed for many things, but as VR technologies advance and become more accessible and easier to use, VR will become the preferred way to communicate designs in many cases. And that's for the reasons that I outlined, where if you can stand inside of a space and immediately understand the proportions and the massing of that space, like you can in VR, then that's a very powerful tool. And if you can interact with it, even better. Advancements in GPU technology and in the game engine software programs are pushing this evolution along. Game engines continue to advance in the quality of imagery they can produce. So the difference between a rendering and animation, one shot at a time in V-Ray, is it can sit and do calculations for a long time and get it extremely physically accurate in the way it looks, but it takes a long time. Game engines use the GPU, but they also take shortcuts to make it look to your eye like it's correct, but it's not exactly physically accurate. So it's the difference between movie special effects and video game cinematics. Once those two things are converged and look basically the same quality, then there will be no need to do the longer way anymore. We will just be able to use game engines to create highly realistic, photorealistic imagery. And we're getting closer and closer to that point. So rendering speed and the ability for live interaction within a space make game engines very appealing and effective for visual communication.